The old courthouse stood like a giant stone fortress in the heart of the city. Its tall windows let in streams of golden sunlight that danced across the wooden floors. People filled every seat, whispering to each other with excited voices. Today was different from other court days. Today, a young boy would speak against one of the most powerful men in the kingdom. 10-year-old Thomas sat in the front row, his small hands gripping the edge of the wooden bench. His brown hair was neatly combed, and he wore his best shirt, the blue one his mother had sewn for him last Christmas. But his eyes showed something that made everyone who looked at him feel worried. They were the eyes of someone who had seen too much for his age. Next to Thomas sat his mother, Sarah. Her face was pale, and dark circles under her eyes showed she had not slept for many nights. She kept one protective hand on her son's shoulder, as if she could shield him from the world just by touching him. Sarah worked as a seamstress in the village, making clothes for wealthy families. She was a quiet woman who never caused trouble for anyone. Across the courtroom, in a special area reserved for important people, sat Captain Marcus Sterling. He was the head of the Royal Guard, a position that made him one of the most respected men in the kingdom. His uniform was perfect. Every button shined, every piece of gold trim gleamed in the light. His thick mustache was perfectly trimmed, and his back was straight as a sword. When people looked at Captain Sterling, they saw honor, strength, and loyalty to the crown. Captain Sterling had served the royal family for 25 years. He had protected 3 different kings and had medals covering his chest that told stories of bravery and sacrifice. Children in the village grew up hearing stories about his heroic deeds. Parents would tell their sons to be like Captain Sterling, honest, brave, and true. But today, everything was about to change. Judge Harrison, an old man with white hair and kind eyes, entered the courtroom. Everyone stood up as he walked to his high chair behind the large wooden desk. Judge Harrison had been deciding court cases for 30 years. He was known for being fair and listening carefully to every person who spoke in his courtroom. "Please be seated," Judge Harrison said in his deep voice. The room became quiet, except for the sound of people settling into their chairs. Today we hear a very serious case. Young Thomas Miller has made accusations against Captain Marcus Sterling of the Royal Guard. This is not a matter we take lightly. The crowd began to whisper again. Some people shook their heads, unable to believe that anyone would accuse Captain Sterling of wrongdoing. Others looked at the small boy with curiosity, wondering what he could possibly have to say against such an important man. Thomas felt hundreds of eyes looking at him. His heart beat so fast he thought everyone could hear it. His mother squeezed his shoulder gently, reminding him that she was there with him. He thought about the past few weeks, the sleepless nights, the nightmares, the way some people in the village had started treating his family differently when word of his accusation spread. Some villagers had been kind, bringing food and offering support, but others had been angry. They could not understand why a young boy would say terrible things about their hero. Some had even suggested that Thomas was lying or that his mother had put him up to it for money. Captain Sterling sat perfectly still, his face showing no emotion. He looked straight ahead, never glancing toward Thomas or his mother. To everyone watching, he appeared calm and confident. This was exactly how a hero should act when faced with lies, people thought. The lawyer representing Thomas was a thin man named Mr. Peterson. He was not as fancy as the lawyers who usually worked with important people, but he had agreed to help Thomas and his mother even though they could not pay much money. Mr. Peterson believed that everyone deserved to have their story heard, no matter how young or poor they were. On the other side sat Sir William Blackwood, one of the most expensive lawyers in the kingdom. He wore expensive clothes and had won many important cases. Sir William specialized in protecting the reputations of powerful people. The royal family had hired him to defend Captain Sterling. Judge Harrison looked at Thomas with gentle eyes. "Young man, do you understand why we are here today?" Thomas nodded, his voice barely a whisper when he answered, "Yes, sir." "And you understand that what you say here must be the complete truth?" "Yes, sir. I promise to tell the truth." The crowd watched as this small boy faced the most important moment of his young life. Some people felt sorry for him, thinking he was confused or scared. Others wondered what could have happened to make him speak against Captain Sterling. Thomas's mother had tried to protect him from this moment. When he first told her what had happened, she had begged him to stay quiet. She knew that accusing someone like Captain Sterling could bring terrible trouble to their family. But Thomas had insisted that people needed to know the truth. As the morning continued, more people crowded into the courthouse. News of the unusual case had spread throughout the city. Merchants closed their shops, farmers left their fields, and families traveled from distant villages to witness this extraordinary event. Outside the courthouse, royal guards stood at attention. They were Captain Sterling's men, loyal soldiers who would follow him anywhere. Some of them looked worried. They had heard whispers about the accusations but could not believe their commander could do anything wrong. The tension in the room grew thicker as everyone waited for the real testimony to begin. This was not just a trial about one man and one boy. This was about trust, power, and whether the truth could survive when it came from the mouth of someone so small and powerless. Thomas looked around the courtroom one more time, taking in all the faces staring at him. Soon, he would have to stand up and tell everyone what had really happened. His words would either destroy the reputation of the kingdom's greatest hero, or prove that even the most powerful people could not escape justice. The most important day of his life was about to begin. Mr. Peterson stood up slowly, his hands trembling slightly as he arranged his papers. He was nervous. This was the biggest case of his career. But when he looked at Thomas, he remembered why he had become a lawyer in the first place. He wanted to help people who had no one else to speak for them. "Your Honor," Mr. Peterson began, "what you will hear today may be difficult to believe, but I ask everyone in this courtroom to listen with open hearts and minds. Truth does not always come from where we expect it." Sir William Blackwood sat confidently at his table, occasionally making notes on expensive paper with a golden pen. He had defended dozens of powerful men before, and he had never lost a case. He was certain this would be another easy victory against a confused child. Judge Harrison nodded to Mr. Peterson. "Please, call your first witness." I called Thomas Miller to the stand. The courtroom became completely silent. Even the birds outside seemed to stop singing. Thomas stood up on shaky legs, his mother's hand slipping away from his shoulder. The walk to the witness stand felt like it took forever. Each step echoed in the quiet room. Thomas climbed into the witness chair, which was too big for him. His feet did not touch the ground, and he had to sit up very straight to see over the wooden rail in front of him. A court clerk approached with a large Bible. "Place your right hand on the Bible," the clerk said kindly. "Do you promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" Thomas's voice was small but clear. "I do." Judge Harrison smiled gently at the boy. "Thomas, I want you to know that you are safe here. Take your time, and tell us what happened in your own words." Thomas took a deep breath and began to speak. "It happened 3 months ago on the day of the spring festival. My mother and I were walking home from the market. We had bought flour and vegetables for dinner." As Thomas spoke, his voice grew stronger. The courtroom was so quiet that everyone could hear him perfectly. "We were taking the shortcut through the forest path because it was getting dark. My mother was carrying the heavy basket and I was helping her." Thomas paused, looking at his mother. She nodded encouragingly, giving him strength to continue. "We heard horses coming fast behind us. Mother pulled me off the path so the riders could pass safely. But they stopped right next to us. Captain Sterling remained perfectly still, his face showing nothing. But some people in the crowd noticed that his hands were clenched tightly in his lap. There were 3 men on horses," Thomas continued. "They were all wearing the uniform of the Royal Guard. The leader got down from his horse and walked toward us." Thomas pointed across the courtroom. "It was him. Captain Sterling." A gasp went through the crowd. Some people started whispering angrily, but Judge Harrison hit his wooden hammer on the desk to make them quiet. "What happened next, Thomas?" Mr. Peterson asked gently. "Captain Sterling looked at my mother in a way that made me scared. He told his men to go check something in the forest, but I think he just wanted them to go away. When they left, he stepped closer to my mother." Thomas's voice began to shake, but he continued. "He said my mother was very pretty. He said he had noticed her in the village before. Then he said things that made my mother step back and pull me behind her." Sarah Miller wiped tears from her eyes as she watched her brave son tell their story. She remembered that terrible day so clearly. The fear, the helplessness, the way Captain Sterling had used his power to frighten them. "My mother told him we needed to go home," Thomas said. She was polite and respectful because she knew he was important. But Captain Sterling laughed and said we could not leave yet. The crowd was completely absorbed in Thomas's story now. Even the people who had not believed him were listening carefully. He grabbed my mother's arm. Thomas continued, his voice growing angry. She told him to let go, but he just held tighter. He said that no one would believe her if she complained because he was Captain Sterling, and she was just a seamstress. Sir William Blackwood finally stood up. "Objection, Your Honor. This is clearly the imagination of a child who has been coached by his mother." Judge Harrison looked thoughtful. "Thomas, how can you remember all these details so clearly? It was 3 months ago." Thomas looked directly at the judge with eyes that seemed too serious for a 10-year-old. "Sir, when something really scary happens to you, you remember every single thing about it. I remember the smell of the horses, the sound of Captain Sterling's voice, and exactly what he was wearing. Some things you can never forget even when you want to." The honesty in Thomas's voice made many people in the courtroom feel uncomfortable. This did not sound like a child making up stories. This sounded like someone telling the truth about something terrible. "What happened after Captain Sterling grabbed your mother?" Mr. Peterson asked. "My mother tried to pull away, but he was too strong. He told her that she should be grateful for his attention. He said he could make life very good for us or very bad, depending on whether she was nice to him." Thomas wiped his nose with his sleeve. "I was so scared, but I knew I had to help my mother. So I picked up a big stick and hit Captain Sterling in the leg as hard as I could." Some people in the crowd almost smiled despite the serious situation. They could picture this small boy trying to protect his mother with a stick. "Captain Sterling got very angry when I hit him," Thomas continued. "He pushed me down hard and I scraped my knee on a rock. Then he told my mother that if she ever told anyone about what happened, he would make sure bad things happened to our family." Thomas looked directly at Captain Sterling for the first time since beginning his testimony. He said he had friends everywhere. Friends who could make people lose their jobs or get arrested or worse. He said no one would ever believe us anyway because he was a hero and we were nobody. The courtroom was completely silent now. Thomas had spoken for 20 minutes and his story was detailed and consistent. Even Captain Sterling's supporters were beginning to look uncertain. "After he threatened us, Captain Sterling got back on his horse," Thomas finished. "His men came back and they all rode away. My mother and I walked home without talking. We were both too scared to say anything." Judge Harrison studied the young boy carefully. "Thomas, why are you telling us this now? Why did you wait 3 months?" Thomas's answer surprised everyone. "Because last week I saw Captain Sterling talking to Mrs. Henderson from the bakery in the same scary way, and I realized that if I stayed quiet, he might hurt other mothers too. My mother taught me that when you know something bad is happening, you have to be brave enough to speak up even when it's hard." The mention of Mrs. Henderson sent a wave of shock through the courtroom. Martha Henderson was a well-respected widow who ran the village bakery with her teenage daughter. She was known for her kindness and her fresh bread that drew customers from neighboring towns. Sir William Blackwood jumped to his feet immediately. "Objection. The witness is now making accusations beyond the scope of this case. This is clearly an attempt to create drama and confusion." But Judge Harrison raised his hand. "I will allow it. Thomas, tell us exactly what you saw with Mrs. Henderson." Thomas shifted in his chair, his small hands gripping the wooden rails. "Last Tuesday I was walking past the bakery with my friend Peter. We saw Captain Sterling inside talking to Mrs. Henderson near the counter. At first it looked normal, like he was just buying bread." The boy's voice grew more confident as he continued. "But then we saw Mrs. Henderson step backward just like my mother did. She was shaking her head and saying something we could not hear. Captain Sterling moved closer to her, backing her against the wall behind the counter." Several people in the crowd turned to look at each other with worried expressions. Mrs. Henderson was sitting 3 rows back, her face pale as she listened to Thomas's words. "Peter wanted to leave, but I told him we should watch to make sure Mrs. Henderson was safe. Captain Sterling put his hand on the wall next to her head, trapping her. He was talking very quietly, but we could see that Mrs. Henderson was scared." Thomas pointed toward Mrs. Henderson in the crowd. She kept looking toward the door where her daughter Annie was working in the back room. "I think she was worried about what might happen to Annie if she did not do what Captain Sterling wanted." Martha Henderson began to cry silently, covering her face with her handkerchief. Her neighbors on both sides put comforting hands on her shoulders. Judge Harrison noticed Mrs. Henderson's reaction. "Mrs. Henderson, would you please approach the bench?" Martha Henderson stood up slowly, her legs shaking. She was a woman in her 40s with graying hair and hands roughened by years of kneading dough. As she walked to the front of the courtroom, every eye followed her. "Mrs. Henderson," Judge Harrison said gently, Thomas has mentioned seeing an interaction between you and Captain Sterling. Is there anything you would like to tell this court?" Martha Henderson looked at Captain Sterling, then at Thomas, then back at the judge. For a long moment, she said nothing. The courtroom held its breath. Finally, she spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "He came to my bakery last Tuesday, just as the boy said." Sir William Blackwood stood up again. "Your Honor, Mrs. Henderson is not a witness in this case. She has not been sworn in, and this testimony is irrelevant to the charges at hand." But Judge Harrison was studying Martha Henderson's face carefully. "Mrs. Henderson, did Captain Sterling threaten you or make you uncomfortable in any way?" Tears streamed down Martha's face as she looked around the courtroom. Many of these people were her customers, her friends, her neighbors. She had kept her silence for a week, telling herself that maybe she had imagined the threat in Captain Sterling's voice. "Maybe she had misunderstood his intentions, he told me," she began, then stopped. She took a deep breath and started again. "He told me that my daughter Annie was growing into a beautiful young woman. He said it would be a shame if anything happened to her or to my business." The courtroom erupted in angry voices. People began standing up and shouting. Some called for Captain Sterling to be arrested immediately, while others demanded proof of these accusations. Judge Harrison pounded his hammer repeatedly. "Order, order in this court. Everyone will sit down and remain quiet, or I will clear this room." When the noise died down, Martha Henderson continued. "He said he could help protect my daughter and my bakery, but only if I was willing to be grateful to him. When I asked what he meant, he smiled in a way that made me feel sick. He said he would visit me again soon to discuss it further." Captain Sterling finally showed emotion. His face turned red, and he leaned over to whisper angrily to Sir William Blackwood. But he still did not speak or stand up. Thomas watched from the witness stand as another woman told a story similar to his mother's. He felt both sad that Mrs. Henderson had been scared too, and relieved that people were starting to believe what he was saying. Judge Harrison addressed Martha Henderson again. "Why did you not report this incident to the authorities?" Martha laughed bitterly. "Sir, Captain Sterling is the authorities. He commands all the guards in this region. Who would I report him to? His own men? And even if I did, who would believe a baker's widow over the kingdom's greatest hero?" Her words echoed exactly what Captain Sterling had told Thomas's mother, that no one would believe them because of who he was and who they were. Mr. Peterson approached Martha Henderson. "Mrs. Henderson, has Captain Sterling visited your bakery since last Tuesday?" "Yes," she answered quietly. "He came yesterday morning. He bought a loaf of bread and told me he was looking forward to our next private conversation. He said after this court case was finished and people stopped believing in silly stories, he would have more time to spend with friends like me." This revelation sent another shock through the courtroom. Captain Sterling had continued his threatening behavior even while facing accusations in court. Sir William Blackwood realized his client was in serious trouble. He stood up and tried to redirect attention back to Thomas. "Your Honor, we have now heard dramatic stories from two people, but where is the evidence? Where are the witnesses? This is all based on the word of a child and a frightened woman who may be influenced by recent events." But Judge Harrison was no longer looking skeptical. "Mr. Blackwood, I find it remarkable that two separate people have told very similar stories about your client's behavior. The details are consistent and both witnesses appear credible." Thomas spoke up from the witness stand, his young voice cutting through the tension. "Sir, there is something else I remember from that day in the forest." Everyone turned to look at him again. "What is it, Thomas?" Judge Harrison asked. "When Captain Sterling pushed me down, his ring scratched against the rock where I fell. It left gold marks on the stone. The rock is still there by the path, and so are the marks. This was the kind of physical evidence that could prove Thomas was telling the truth. If the rock existed and showed signs of contact with a gold ring, it would support his story." Mr. Peterson looked excited. "Your Honor, I request that the court send someone to examine this rock immediately." Sir William Blackwood knew this could be the evidence that destroyed his case. "Your Honor, even if such marks exist, they prove nothing. Anyone with a gold ring could have made them at any time." But Thomas was not finished. "The rock also has my blood on it from where I scraped my knee, and there are hoof prints in the soft ground nearby from the horses. If no one has disturbed the area, everything should still be there." Judge Harrison made his decision. "This court will recess for 2 hours while a team of officials examines the location described by Thomas. We will reconvene this afternoon to hear their findings." As people began filing out of the courtroom, Thomas climbed down from the witness stand. His mother hugged him tightly, proud of his courage but worried about what would happen next. Captain Sterling finally stood up, his perfect posture unchanged. But for the first time, some people in the crowd looked at him with suspicion instead of admiration. The boy's words were creating cracks in the hero's perfect reputation. During the recess, Thomas and his mother sat on a bench outside the courthouse. Sarah held her son close, stroking his hair gently. "You were so brave in there," she whispered. "I am proud of you for telling the truth no matter how scared you were." Thomas looked up at his mother with worried eyes. "Mama, what if they do not find the rock? What if someone moved it or cleaned away the marks?" Sarah kissed his forehead. "Then we will know that we did the right thing by speaking up. Sometimes doing the right thing is more important than winning." Around them, groups of people gathered in small circles, discussing what they had heard. Some villagers approached Sarah and Thomas to offer their support. An elderly woman named Mrs. Fletcher, who had known Thomas since he was a baby, sat down beside them. "That boy of yours has more courage than most grown men," Mrs. Fletcher said to Sarah. "It takes real strength to stand up to someone so powerful." But not everyone was supportive. A group of men who had served under Captain Sterling in the past stood near the courthouse steps, their faces angry and their voices loud. "This is madness," one of them said. "Captain Sterling saved my life in the border wars. He is a hero, not a criminal. That boy must be lying, or someone is paying his family to make up stories." Another man nodded. "My son wants to join the Royal Guard because he admires Captain Sterling. How can we let a child destroy the reputation of our greatest protector?" Thomas heard their words and felt scared again. These men were big and strong, and they looked at him like he was their enemy. His mother pulled him closer, shielding him from their angry stares. Meanwhile, inside the courthouse, Captain Sterling sat alone with Sir William Blackwood. For the first time, cracks were showing in the captain's calm exterior. "This is getting out of control," Captain Sterling said through gritted teeth. "How did a simple complaint from a seamstress turn into this public disaster?" Sir William Blackwood looked worried. "The boy is more convincing than I expected, and Martha Henderson's testimony was damaging. If they find evidence at that rock location, we will have serious problems." Captain Sterling stood up and began pacing. "There has to be a way to stop this. I have too much to lose. My reputation, my position, my future. Everything depends on people believing in my honor." "The best strategy now is to attack their credibility," Sir William advised. "We need to suggest that the mother coached the boy, that Martha Henderson was influenced by gossip, that this is all a conspiracy against you." But Captain Sterling was not listening. He was thinking about all the other women in the village he had approached over the years. He had been careful, always choosing women who were alone or vulnerable, always making sure there were no witnesses. He had used his power and reputation to silence them, knowing that no one would believe their word against his. Now, for the first time, he was facing real consequences for his actions. Outside, the investigation team had reached the forest path where Thomas said the incident occurred. The team included Judge Harrison himself, 2 court officials, and a local doctor who could examine any physical evidence they might find. Thomas had given them very specific directions. Follow the main path for about 10 minutes, then look for the lightning-struck oak tree. The shortcut trail starts just to the left of that tree. Walk down the shortcut for about 5 minutes, and you will find a large gray rock with a flat top near some berry bushes. Judge Harrison was impressed by how detailed and precise Thomas's directions were. Either the boy had an excellent memory, or he had been to this location many times and knew it well. They found the lightning-struck oak exactly where Thomas had described it. The shortcut trail was narrow but well used, suggesting that many villagers took this route regularly. 5 minutes down the trail, they discovered the rock. It was exactly as Thomas had described, large, gray, and with a flat top that was perfect for sitting. But what they found on and around the rock was even more important. "Look at this," said Dr. Martin, the court's medical examiner. He pointed to scratches on the rock's surface that gleamed with traces of gold. "These marks are fresh, probably made within the last few months." One of the court officials examined the ground around the rock. "There are definitely hoofprints here in the soft earth. 3 horses by the look of it, just as the boy said." Judge Harrison studied a dark stain on the rock's edge. "Doctor, what do you make of this discoloration?" Dr. Martin took out a small magnifying glass and examined the stain carefully. It appears to be dried blood. Given its color and consistency, I would estimate it is approximately 3 months old. The evidence was matching Thomas's story perfectly, but the most convincing proof was yet to come. "Your Honor," called one of the officials from a few feet away, "you should see this." In the soft ground near some berry bushes, they found clear impressions that told a story. There were large boot prints that showed where someone had stood and moved around aggressively. Next to them were smaller prints, the kind a woman's shoes would make, that showed signs of stepping backward multiple times. Most telling of all were tiny footprints that belonged to a child. The small prints showed where someone had run forward quickly, stopped suddenly, and then been knocked down, leaving a clear impression in the dirt where a small body had fallen. "This is remarkable," Judge Harrison said quietly. "The physical evidence supports every detail of Thomas's account. The positioning, the timing, even the sequence of events, it all matches perfectly." Dr. Martin nodded. "In my professional opinion, this scene shows signs of exactly the kind of struggle the boy described. An adult male confronting a woman, a child intervening, and the child being pushed down forcefully. The investigation team spent another hour carefully documenting everything they found. They took samples of the gold scratches from the ring, collected soil from the hoof prints, and made detailed drawings of the scene. As they prepared to return to the courthouse, Judge Harrison felt a heavy weight in his chest. He had hoped, for everyone's sake, that Thomas's story would prove to be the imagination of a confused child. Instead, they had found evidence that supported a much darker truth. Back at the courthouse, word had spread that the investigation team had found something significant. The crowd outside had grown larger, with people arriving from distant villages to witness the conclusion of this extraordinary case. Captain Sterling watched from a window as Judge Harrison's team returned. He could tell from their serious expressions and careful documentation that they had found evidence. His hands began to shake slightly, the first time in 25 years of military service that fear had affected his composure. Sir William Blackwood noticed his client's nervousness. "Whatever they found, we can challenge it. Physical evidence can be misinterpreted or even planted." But Captain Sterling knew better. He remembered that day in the forest clearly. He remembered the feel of his ring scraping against the rock when he grabbed for the boy. He remembered the satisfying sound the child made when he pushed him down. He had been so angry at being interrupted that he had not thought about leaving evidence behind. When the courthouse bell rang to signal the resumption of the trial, everyone filed back inside with a sense of anticipation. The morning had belonged to Thomas and his testimony. The afternoon would reveal whether his words were supported by facts. As Thomas took his seat next to his mother, he noticed that more people were looking at him with respect instead of doubt. Martha Henderson gave him an encouraging smile from across the room. Even some of Captain Sterling's supporters seemed less certain than they had been before. Judge Harrison returned to his bench, carrying a folder full of documents and photographs from the investigation. The evidence that would determine Captain Sterling's fate was about to be revealed to the world. Judge Harrison placed the investigation folder on his desk and looked out at the packed courtroom. The tension was so thick it felt like everyone was holding their breath at the same time. "Ladies and gentlemen," Judge Harrison began, "the investigation team has returned from the forest location described by Thomas Miller. I will now present our findings to the court." He opened the folder and pulled out the first document. "We found the rock exactly where Thomas said it would be, near berry bushes on the shortcut trail. The rock shows fresh scratches containing traces of gold, consistent with contact from a gold ring within the past 3 months." A murmur went through the crowd. Captain Sterling's supporters looked shocked, while those who believed Thomas seemed relieved. Judge Harrison continued, "We also found dried blood on the rock's edge, which our medical examiner estimates to be approximately 3 months old, matching the time frame of the alleged incident." Thomas squeezed his mother's hand. Everything he had remembered was being proven true. Furthermore, the judge said, "We discovered hoof prints from 3 horses in the soft ground, along with boot prints from an adult male, shoe prints from an adult female, and clear evidence that a child fell or was pushed down in that exact location." The evidence was overwhelming. Even Sir William Blackwood looked pale as he realized his case was falling apart. Judge Harrison set down the documents and looked directly at Captain Sterling. Captain Sterling, in light of this evidence, I am going to ask you directly. Do you wish to respond to these accusations? For the first time since the trial began, all eyes turned to Captain Sterling. He sat perfectly straight in his uniform, but those closest to him could see that his hands were shaking slightly. Captain Sterling stood up slowly. His voice, when he finally spoke, was different from the confident tone people were used to hearing. Your Honor, I have served this kingdom faithfully for 25 years. I have risked my life countless times to protect innocent people. He paused, looking around the courtroom at faces that had once looked at him with pure admiration. I do not understand how my years of service and sacrifice can be questioned based on the words of a child and some marks on a rock. But Thomas was not intimidated anymore. He stood up in his seat and spoke clearly. Captain Sterling, do you remember what you said to my mother that day? Judge Harrison was about to tell Thomas to sit down, but something in the boy's voice made him wait. You told her that no one would ever believe us because you were important and we were nobody, Thomas continued. You said you could make good things happen for us or bad things, depending on whether my mother was nice to you. Do you remember saying that? Captain Sterling's face grew red. I remember no such conversation because it never happened. Thomas stepped into the aisle, his young voice carrying throughout the silent courtroom. Then why did you know exactly where to find the rock when your lawyer asked about evidence? Why did you look worried when I mentioned the gold scratches? And why have you not looked at me or my mother even once during this whole trial? The questions hit Captain Sterling like physical blows. Thomas was right. He had been avoiding eye contact because he knew the boy was telling the truth. Suddenly, another voice spoke from the back of the courtroom. Because he is guilty of everything the boy says and much worse. Everyone turned to see who was speaking. It was Rebecca Thompson, a young woman who worked as a maid in one of the wealthy houses in town. She stood up, her face pale but determined. I have been listening to this trial and I cannot stay quiet anymore, Rebecca said as she walked toward the front of the courtroom. Captain Sterling did the same thing to me 2 years ago. Sir William Blackwood jumped up immediately. Objection. This woman is not a witness in this case and has no legal standing to speak. But Judge Harrison was studying Rebecca's face carefully. Miss Thompson, are you saying that Captain Sterling threatened or harmed you? Rebecca nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. He cornered me behind the market one evening when I was walking home from work. He said the same things to Thomas's mother, that I was pretty, that he could help me or hurt me, that no one would believe me if I complained. More gasps went through the crowd. Captain Sterling was looking around the room frantically now as if searching for an escape. What happened? Judge Harrison asked gently. I was so scared that I ran away, Rebecca said. But he found me the next day and told me that if I ever told anyone, he would make sure I lost my job and could never find work in any decent house again. He said he had done the same thing to other women, and none of them had ever dared to speak against him. Thomas felt both sad and relieved. Sad that other women had been hurt, but relieved that he was not the only one brave enough to speak up. Another woman stood up in the middle of the courtroom. It was Ellen Morrison, a widow who sold vegetables at the market. He threatened me too, she said quietly. Last year during the harvest festival, then another woman stood up and another. Within minutes, 7 different women were on their feet, each one sharing a similar story of how Captain Sterling had used his power to frighten and threaten them. The courtroom was in complete chaos. People were shouting, some in anger at Captain Sterling, others in disbelief that their hero could have done such things. Judge Harrison pounded his gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order. Captain Sterling looked around wildly as more and more women spoke against him. His perfect reputation was crumbling before his eyes. The power he had used to silence these women was finally being turned against him. This is impossible, he shouted suddenly, his composure completely broken. These women are lying. They are jealous of my position, my success. They want to destroy me. But his protests only made things worse. The more he denied everything, the more desperate and guilty he sounded. Thomas watched in amazement as the truth he had been carrying alone for 3 months spread throughout the courtroom. Other people had been hurt by Captain Sterling, but they had all been too scared to speak up until now. Sir William Blackwood realized his client was destroying himself. Captain Sterling, please sit down and let me handle this, he pleaded. But Captain Sterling was beyond listening to advice. Years of using his power to control and threaten others had made him believe he was untouchable. Now faced with the collapse of everything he had built, he could not accept reality. "I am Captain Sterling," he roared. "I have protected this kingdom with my blood and my sword. I have saved lives and fought enemies. How dare these people question my honor?" Judge Harrison finally restored enough order to speak. "Captain Sterling, your service record is not in question here. What is in question is your conduct toward innocent women and children." The judge turned to address the women who had spoken up. "Ladies, your courage in speaking today is commendable. However, this trial is specifically about the incident involving Thomas Miller and his mother." He looked back at Captain Sterling. "Captain, the evidence is clear. The physical proof supports Thomas's testimony exactly. Multiple witnesses have now described similar behavior from you. Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Captain Sterling stood in silence for a long moment, his chest heaving with anger and fear. Finally, he spoke in a voice filled with bitterness. "I have given everything to this kingdom. Everything. And this is how I am repaid, destroyed by the lies of peasants and children." His words revealed the truth that Thomas had understood from the beginning. Captain Sterling saw people like Thomas and his mother as beneath him, as people whose feelings and safety did not matter because they were not important or powerful. Judge Harrison had heard enough. "Captain Sterling, you have shown no remorse, no accountability, and no respect for the people you swore to protect. Your behavior is a disgrace to your uniform and your position." The judge paused, looking around the packed courtroom. "Based on the physical evidence, the credible testimony of Thomas Miller, the supporting statements from multiple witnesses, and your own responses here today, I find you guilty of abuse of power, assault, and threatening behavior toward innocent citizens." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Thomas felt like a huge weight had been lifted from his shoulders. People believed him. The truth had won, but Captain Sterling was not finished. In a final act of desperation, he pointed at Thomas and shouted, "You have destroyed everything I worked for. A stupid little boy has ruined the life of a hero." Thomas looked back at Captain Sterling calmly and said something that stunned everyone in the courtroom. "Sir, I did not destroy your life. You destroyed your own life when you chose to hurt people who could not fight back. I just had the courage to tell people what you did." The wisdom and strength in those words, coming from such a young boy, left the entire courtroom speechless. Even Captain Sterling seemed to realize that Thomas was right. Judge Harrison smiled at Thomas with genuine admiration. "Young man, you have shown more courage and honor today than many adults show in their entire lives. You should be very proud of yourself." As the court officials moved to arrest Captain Sterling, he looked around the room one final time. The faces that had once looked at him with respect and admiration now showed disappointment, anger, and disgust. His 25 years of heroic service would be remembered, but they would forever be overshadowed by his crimes against innocents. 6 months later, the village had changed in ways both small and large. The courthouse that had witnessed Thomas's brave testimony now hosted regular meetings where villagers could speak about problems without fear. Judge Harrison had made it clear that everyone's voice mattered, regardless of their age, wealth, or position in society. Thomas walked through the market with his mother, no longer the scared boy who had once whispered his terrible secret. He had grown taller and stronger, but more importantly, he carried himself with the confidence that comes from knowing you did the right thing, even when it was hard. The villagers treated Thomas and his mother differently now. Some people called Thomas a hero, though he did not like that word very much. "Heroes are supposed to be big and strong," he told his mother one day. "I was just scared and telling the truth." Sarah Miller had started a new job working for Judge Harrison, helping other people who needed to bring cases to court but did not know how. Her experience with the legal system and her son's courage had shown her that ordinary people could fight for justice when they worked together. Martha Henderson's bakery was busier than ever. People came not just for her excellent bread, but to support a woman who had found the courage to speak up when it mattered. She had hired 2 new assistants and was teaching her daughter Annie how to run the business. The women who had testified against Captain Sterling had formed a group they called the Truth Tellers. They met every week to support each other and to help other women who faced similar problems. Rebecca Thompson had become their leader, using her terrible experience to help others find their voices. As for Captain Sterling himself, he was serving a 10-year sentence in the kingdom's prison. His medals had been taken away, his name removed from monuments, and his position given to a younger officer who understood that true strength meant protecting people, not hurting them. But the story was not just about punishment. The new captain of the Royal Guard, a woman named Captain Elena Rodriguez, had implemented new rules and training for all guards. They now learned that their job was to serve all people equally, regardless of social status or wealth. Thomas often visited the forest path where everything had started. The rock was still there, but now children from the village played around it safely. The berry bushes had grown larger, and someone had cleared the path to make it easier for families to use. One warm afternoon, Thomas was sitting on the famous rock when a younger boy approached him. The child was about 7 years old with curious eyes and dirt on his knees from playing. "Are you really Thomas Miller?" the little boy asked. "The one who stood up to Captain Sterling?" Thomas smiled. "Yes, that is me. What is your name?" "I am Peter Walsh. My mama told me about what you did. She said you were very brave." Thomas patted the rock beside him, and Peter climbed up to sit next to him. "Can I tell you a secret, Peter?" The little boy nodded eagerly. "I was not brave when it happened," Thomas said quietly. "I was terrified. My hands were shaking, my voice was shaking, and I wanted to hide under my bed instead of going to court." Peter looked confused. "But if you were scared, how were you brave?" Thomas had thought about this question many times over the past months. "I learned that being brave does not mean you are not scared. Being brave means you do the right thing even when you are scared. Sometimes the most important things we do are the things that frighten us the most." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to birds singing in the trees above them. Then Peter asked another question. "What if something bad happens to me someday? What if someone tries to hurt me or my family?" Thomas looked at the younger boy seriously. "Then you tell a grown-up you trust, just like I told my mama. And if the first person does not believe you, you tell another person and another until someone listens. Never keep scary secrets alone, Peter. There are always people who want to help, but they cannot help if they do not know what is wrong." Peter nodded solemnly, as if he were memorizing important instructions. "And remember," Thomas added, "it does not matter how big or important the person is who is causing the problem. Wrong is wrong no matter who does it. Everyone has to follow the same rules about treating people with kindness and respect." As the sun began to set, the two boys climbed down from the rock and started walking back toward the village. Peter ran ahead, eager to get home to his family, but Thomas walked slowly, thinking about how much had changed. His teacher, Mr. Williams, had asked him to speak to the older students at school about his experience. At first, Thomas had been nervous about telling his story again, but he had realized that sharing what happened might help other children who face similar problems. When Thomas finally reached his house, his mother was waiting for him with a warm dinner and a proud smile. She had received a letter that day from the Queen herself, thanking Thomas for his courage and service to the kingdom. "You know what makes me happiest about all of this?" Sarah asked her son as they ate together. "What, Mama?" "It is not that Captain Sterling was punished, though he deserved it. It is not even that people now treat us with respect, though that is nice. What makes me happiest is that you learned you have a voice and you are not afraid to use it when something is wrong." Thomas smiled at his mother. "I learned it from you, Mama. You taught me to tell the truth even when it is hard. You taught me that every person matters no matter who they are." That night, as Thomas lay in bed, he thought about all the people whose lives had changed because of one moment of courage in a courtroom. The women who no longer lived in fear, the new guards who understood their true duty, the children like Peter who now knew they had the right to speak up if someone tried to hurt them. He thought about Captain Sterling too, and surprisingly, he did not feel angry anymore. He felt sorry for a man who had forgotten that real strength comes from helping others, not controlling them. As Thomas drifted off to sleep, he could hear his mother singing softly in the next room, the same lullaby she had sung to him when he was small and afraid of monsters in the dark. But Thomas was no longer afraid of monsters. He had learned that the scariest monsters were real people who abused their power, and that even a small boy with a truthful voice could defeat them. The village was peaceful now, and children could walk safely through the forest paths. But more importantly, they knew that if danger ever came again, they had the right to speak up, and there would be people ready to listen and help. Thomas's story had become legend in the village, but not the kind of legend about knights and dragons. It was a better kind of legend, one that reminded everyone that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when they chose courage over silence. Truth over convenience and justice over fear. And in the courthouse where it all began, Judge Harrison kept a small plaque on his desk with words that Thomas had spoken that day. When you know something bad is happening, you have to be brave enough to speak up, even when it is hard. Those words served as a daily reminder that justice was not just about laws and courts and judges. It was about people like Thomas Miller, who proved that even the smallest voice could change the world when it spoke the truth.